suminkštėja.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marius. And now, after we got a taste of the poetry, we can start our conversation. Actually, I would encourage you also to join us in any time, so just please raise your hands. But I will start with the biographical question, because you are a Palestinian who was born in Syria. Now you live in Sweden, and actually I'm very interested in how do those different parts of identities coexist in you. And I'm asking this also because in one of the interviews that you gave, you said that now in Stockholm you have your house, but you're not your home. And what is home? And actually I was also referring to the poetry of Zbigniew Herbert, of a Polish poet, while reading your poetry, and he writes in his report from the besieged city, and if the city falls, but a single man escapes, he will carry the city within himself. On the roads of exile, he will be the city. Do you recognize something similar inside you, because maybe Damascus or Palestine is still the thing that you carry, and that's what preventing you from, I don't know, rooting in another place? And
yes, I am a Palestinian, born in a Palestinian refugee camp in Damascus for a Palestinian father from Ashkelon, and a Syrian mother from Dar'a. And I live now in Sweden because I believe that no one should live under the dictatorship. So in 2008 I got the chance to leave Syria and I escaped. 7 of my friends were arrested in that time. And it's not complicated. It didn't function to be on a dictatorship. It could be complicated for many people, but for a writer, it's it didn't work at all, because writing is connected to freedom of speech and like this. So it was more complicated than usual. And I was paperless because I'm from a group of Palestinians who didn't have paper because they came to Syria in 1967, not 1948, after Nakba. And it's a very long question. I don't want you to enter it because it's long, but we have no paper like the Palestinians who live in Syria who came in 1948 after the Nakba. We came after the occupation of Gaza and West Bank. So in the moment I got paper, I ran away. I was invited to Sweden. And I stayed, and I was honest with the festival. I told them if I came to Sweden to the festival, I will stay. And they answered me in very Swedish, perfect way. They told me, we invite you to the festival. What will happen after the festival, it's your life. You can stay, you could leave, what you want. So, and this is rarely happen in the Western world. So yes, in that sense, I run away. But when I say that in Stockholm, it's my house, but it's not my home. This has happened later. Before the Syrian revolution, I began to relate it to Stockholm. And I began to build my life that this is my place. Because always in the back of my head and of my life, that there is a place called Damascus. I will go there when I am tired and when the things will stop function, because the Western world is really different than the environment I came from. So I always feel relaxed when I remember that Damascus is in waiting somehow for the return. In the moment we make the Syrian revolution and we defeat it now, and when I saw, because I'm left, and I saw all the left in the world supporting the Syrian dictatorship. And I lost 300 of my friends, real number, my brother, my 2 uncles, and all these people. And we lost around 2 million got killed by Assad. And everywhere I go, the people ask me about ISIS. And I always try to say for them, ISIS came 3.5 years after Assad began to bomb Syria, and they killed 2,600. Killed by ISIS during the report, but Assad killed 2 million. We reported 650,000. And I couldn't even add my brother to the report because we couldn't find his body. So who remained with the 1 million who we didn't add them. So I got very disappointed from the world. And I began to travel like hell without arriving. And as we say in English, I am on the road to push the problem forward. And in that moment, Stockholm began to escape from my hand as the water escaped from the fingers. And I lost Stockholm because Damascus is gone. And there will no be return for me. The paradise in my mind disappeared. So the fact it became shaking like earthquake. So I began to travel, and Stockholm became only house for me where I can throw my summer clothes, take winter clothes, and travel again. All the way like this. And it's make me so tired physically, but it's make me survive in a mental way. And I think many of the Western, they did that after the Second War, that they tried to escape the war because it's really not fun, like didn't work that you can face it face to face. But the difference is if, and I like this poem that you mentioned, it's really, this part is really real, pure poetry. Yes, if I carry Damascus in me, I remember in 2009 I wrote a poem where I described that I wrote about Stockholm, and I was very aggressive that time towards Stockholm. I was describing Stockholm as the telephone in the street that it didn't speak with you if you didn't put money on it. It's really like a kind of capitalism I'm not used to like. And in that poem I say, I will tell you about the city I live in, Stockholm, blah, 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 blah. And then I say, I will tell you about the city live in me. So I live in Stockholm and Damascus live in me. And then I say Damascus resemble freedom. It's a dictatorship, of course, but it's really resemble freedom. And this is 2009, 2 years before the revolution. So it's really complicated. But the dimension for me is not important. I really believe in the cosmopolitan in a way, and multicultural and diverse. I feel sad for racist people, and that the one who have one dimension. So I didn't believe in countries. I love cities. Nationalities didn't mean anything for me. I love Berlin, New York, Istanbul, Damascus. Yeah, cities is more important. And because that, I think I want to add this. I noticed that in the passports, they ask you, when I got the Swedish passport, they told me, you have two choices. Either we write Syria or not. But the city, it must be. And then I was fascinated by this. I told him why. He said, I don't know. And then I noticed that in all over the world, you allow to mention the country or not. So you can say Damascus, Syria. You're born in Damascus, Syria. But you must put the city. And then somebody told me it's because the country always changed. Czech Republic became, it was Czechoslovakia, it became one country, Macedonia, you know this. But the cities always exist. So yeah, then I began to be more fascinated by the cities. Damascus was part of the Roman Empire, was from the Greek Empire, from the Islamic Empire, and all like this. So yeah, I don't know.
I remember once I was doing a research for one of my lectures about the changing perception of Holocaust in Lithuania, and then I simply Googled and entered the word genocide into Google, and then I got such a results. For example, that the genocide of cats is happening in one of the districts here in Vilnius, and then I thought, okay, so probably we lose the meaning of the words, the power of the words, the power of the words to impress, to challenge us. And actually in your poetry, like for example in the Massacre, you write that massacre is a dead metaphor that is eating my friends, eating them without salt. In Black Milk, I read similar verses, and poetry refuses to obey me by repeating the outworn metaphors of classical poets. And actually, I would like to ask you about how did you search for your poetical language through those all outworn metaphors, and what do you seek by your poetry to challenge, to confront, or?
Many people in the world, not many, all of them, and I'm really in clash with this. Like all the readers and the writers I know, they think that I write political poetry.
Mm-hmm. On the back of the book, it's written that it's pure political as it should be.
Yeah, it's not. It's not at all what I like. It's really wrong, totally wrong. Yes, politics is in everything. Politics, class, gender, feminist, it's all mixed. You can't separate anything from politics. But this, I really mean it. This is not political. This is my life. It's so simple to that level that this is my life. I write about my memories, my experience, my life, my friends, my family. I can't be separated from my reality. I can't be writing about the beauty of the spring after the snow in Sweden and my mother under bombing without water because the siege of Assad army. Like it's like it didn't work. The dictionary of my poetry, it's changed. It's became rough. And I think if my poetry considered to be a political, as I always say, then the Swedish poetry is political because they write about nature, the things that they surrounded by, they reflect their memories. I have the right to reflect my memory. If my poetry is political, the Swedish poetry is political. Or not. Or they should find another solution. They change my life, make my life good, then my poetry will be about love. Let's make, we make a deal, like change my life, give me normal life like the one you have, and then when we discuss everything. But if about the metaphor, when you say the metaphor, actually, you know, in Syria we use the metaphor as a way to escape, you know, and it's. After the Syrian revolution, the Syrian poets began to escape from the metaphor itself because now they can say the things in a direct way, and because the killing in Syria is happening in a direct way, and it's so clear. 1 million video on YouTube filmed by the Assad killing themselves. They film it and they put it on the YouTube to make the people scary and stop the revolution. So when the killing is clear and direct, then no need for the metaphor itself. I began to not use the metaphor in a way. After I arrived to Sweden, I began to have, in Arabic we have different kind of metaphors, what we call majaz and isti'ara, in different way in the European way. So I began to not use isti'ara at all, because I feel like I tasted the freedom in freedom of speech and freedom of act and like this in the European society. So no need to go back. But the word metaphor, it's different than the metaphor itself. When I say the word metaphor in my poem, I mean something. When I say dead metaphor, it is in every language we have this what we call dead metaphor. It's two words, you put them together and they give new meanings, and with the time they became not metaphor because they became new meaning. But if somebody take your dead metaphor in Lithuanian and translate it to German, and he translated word by word, he go to the original metaphor, and then it became problematic and poetic in a way, or as the European describe the Arabic poetry, and it's totally wrong. They say flourish poetry or like exotic, and it's not that at all, because they didn't know how to translate the dead metaphor. Like I can say in Arabic, my mind is flying. It's mean I'm crazy. So if you can't translate it, my mind is flying, and then you say, oh, this is a flourish poem. No, it's mean crazy. It's a dead metaphor. If you understand what I say. So there's differences when I mention the word metaphor and like in the poem and the metaphor itself. And about how the poetry, if I feel that if if the poem itself or the word itself could have effect, yeah, I discussed this once. And I think, no, poetry didn't, not able to change the world, not at all. But I noticed something, that poetry are able to change people, some people, who they are able to change the world. And I have been changed by a poem when I was 17. So yes, people are able to change. So poetry could change some people, in a way.
Mm-hmm. Today it's a special day. We celebrate 100-year anniversary of the end of the First World War, and at that time it was a great war, the war that was supposed to end all wars. And one of the cliches is also that history is our teacher. We repeat, and then actually we can ask ourselves, do we learn something from it? Because after the First World War came the second one. Now it's also, we speak about at least a renewal of the Cold War, which is quite hot. And I would like to ask about history, of your interpretation of history. Can we learn from it? And for example, in The Capital, in one of your poems, you write such a line: a security man armed with a history stands to mark out a barrier between the suburbs and happiness. So, which means that it's not just a It's not a teacher, but it's actually used as a gun to build walls, to separate people. And can we find the, common language? For example, you also used the term Nakba. When Israelis celebrate Independence Day, you commemorate it as a Nakba. So we already see how history goes to different ways. And it's not only about a narrative. This narrative has consequences then in everyday life. So,
yeah.
Do you see any hope, for example, that one day, in Israel and Palestine, people will have some kind of common understanding? Or
yeah, in the poem, The Capital, it's have a really strange story, because I went to Antwerp and stayed 1 month in Belgium to write about the blood diamond, and they bring it from Congo and Sierra Leone to Antwerp, and they cut it there, and they make it white. They wash it, so it became legal, and then they send it to Tel Aviv and like this. And this, they call it a blood diamond. I think some of you, or maybe all of you, know about it. It's supporting the civil wars in Europe and Africa and like this. So I was fascinated by this. I decided to go to Antwerp and stay 1 month. And during this month, I have communicated a lot with the Orthodox Jew who were working in the diamond. And they like so much that I'm a Palestinian. And so we became some friends with some of them. And I want to write even about Congo, how small country like Belgium killed 15 million in Congo only for joy. Leopold II killed them only for, he was hunting them. So during my stay in this 1 month in Antwerp, the Syrian people began to drown like hell in the Mediterranean by thousands. So my poem switched from the blood diamond to the Mediterranean. So it began with very strange line. What is the capital of Congo, Kinshasa? Antwerp. And it's end with the Syrian drawing in the line. And from this poem, I began to judge the colonialism history again. I am a result of the colonialism history. So I began to judge it again in a different way, not the way that white people judge their history. That is bullshit, because they are the occupier. And the history written by the strong. No, to judge the history from the people who paid for that colonialism history. So I began to think about it, and I find some things, like, for example, that I am really admire the European civilization, and I really in love with it. I came from one of the greatest civilizations in the world, the Arabic. It was the longest period in history, 1,000 years, for the biggest empire in history, from Spain to China. Yes, the Mongolian is bigger, but they didn't count it because it came fast and disappeared fast without making change. So I came from the empire where written 1 million book, and we were leading the whole world, double size the Roman, for double time. But I noticed that all civilization built the world in this way, while the Western civilization built it on this way. So the world, what we know now, it's built by the Western. The way we behave and act and eat and dress, even the asphalt in the street, it is Western. In this way, I'm fascinated by this literature, history, symphony, philosophy. I'm part of that. I find myself part of that. But to have this, to have warm water when you open your tub to take shower in Stockholm, you know that you got this hot water because somebody having cold water now. Belgium is very poor country, and now it's very rich country. So I began to think again and again and again about this. And I arrived to that if we didn't discuss the things in a clear way, we will arrive to the result Edward Said say in the Orientalism. The things, it will not work. So I began to not provoke, but say the things, give the things its name. Many people didn't like what I say. It's okay, but because I touch, as we say, I touch the wound, and I noticed something very important about the center, that because of this civilization, we became so centered to ourselves in the West. Like now I'm trying to look to you, and I really can't see you because the light. I really do. I try to focus all my life, all the time now to see the faces, but I can't. This is exactly the situation in Europe. We are under the very strong light of civilization from our knowledge and our literature and our everything. So it makes us hard to see outside, to see the outsider. Even if we look from the window, we can't see. So this civilization make us center to ourselves. And I remember when I was reading about Scandinavia, after I went to Sweden, I find that the oldest document written about Sweden or in Scandinavia, it was Arabic document written 1,100 years ago by ambassador. In that time, the king in Baghdad sent ambassador to all over the world. One of them arrived to the north. The Russians say Russia, the Finnish say Finland, the Norwegians say Norway, and the Swedish say Sweden. Nobody knows where he arrived. But in this big document, it exists in the Berlin Museum, he described from 1,100 years ago the situation in Scandinavia. He was well educated, came from city have 2 million people, Baghdad. He finished university. He's so clean. He's so civilized. And he arrived to this barbarian Scandinavian people, Vikings. They didn't even take shower. And he speak exactly like white men speak about African and Indian. And then I noticed that every fucking civilization, when it's big, it became so centered and so racist. So this Arabic man speaking in very imperialism way about these people because he was well educated. And in that moment, I began to less blame the European civilization, because I understand that this is part of the empire. And this is take me to something. It is about the right of critique. Because I notice every time I make critique in Sweden, people say for me, go back to your land. No. The right of critique is one of the human rights. that must be saved. Because who was the people who were not allowed to make critique in the history? The slaves, women under the patriarchy, Jewish under the Nazi occupation, Arabs in I don't know where. So people who are under occupation or under like class situation in India or I don't know where. So I feel that the right of critique, it should be even over anything. And that I began to, by finding the political things in the life and make it poetic things in my poetry, to make the history a poetic, to make the massacre poetic, and in a way to add the criticize, so you can say the truth to the power. And from there, I began to think about myself. Why I born in a Palestinian refugee camp in Damascus? Because the Europeans were racist, and they were anti-Semitic, and they killed the Jewish. It began from Fernando and Isabella in Spain, ending with the final solution. And instead of they pay for their fault, we, the Palestinian, we pay our land as the solution for the fucking European racism. And we pay for what the Nazi did. And because that, I find myself in a refugee camp without country. And by this way, if somebody say for me, go back, what I should say for him? I say for him, go back to where? To the country I lost because your grandfather was Nazi? What is the answer? Go back to your homeland. Where is my homeland? So all these things began me to think that, yeah, everything they say, it's something, and reality is something else. We are the only nation in the world still paying for what the Nazi did, because the Europeans solved their problem. There is only one nation still did pay off the Third Reich, is the Palestinian. 13 million refugees. So by this way, I felt that I will be very separated from my reality if I didn't discuss the things I believe in. And from that moment, I began to not say that what I write is politics. Actually, it is the life, if you understand what I say.
So in this case, to be apolitical would mean to stay silent at all, not to speak, not to write, not to do anything, because everything can be interpreted as politics. And this beauty poetry, as you mentioned, it's also politics, not to speak about other things. And now I turn my head to you, so maybe you have some questions and want to enter into our discussion. Okay. I see. I will just bring my microphone.
Thank you for the powerful things that you said. I was just wondering, you were talking about Swedish poetry a minute ago and about what you write and the language you write it in. I was wondering about your reading. In terms of languages and in terms of subject matter, what do you read and how do you source your reading, and what languages do you read in?
Oh, thank you.
And how that has changed in time.
Oh, thank you. No, I read in Arabic. I'm lucky enough to be born in this big language. So if the book were not translated in Morocco, somebody will translate it in Egypt, if not in Dubai, if not in Syria. So like 475 million, 22 countries. Mostly the books translated. If they didn't translate it, I read it in English. But no, I read in Arabic. And it's, sometimes you got many translations, so you could choose even. So if I want to read, for example, the classic things like Kafka, it's like it's translated in translated in Mauritania, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Yemen, Qatar. It's translated all this, and several times. So you should, sometimes it's so difficult. Really, it's annoying. And there is a lot of discussion. The translation of Ahmad is better than in 1967, better than the translation of Ali in Morocco and like this. So it's really more complicated. So I know I read in Arabic, but sometimes in English, not in Swedish. My Swedish is not so good because I didn't even go there. And I didn't read from 1 year. But it's a decision. I decided to stop reading for 1 year and do something else. Like Helen today, she mentioned that if you didn't read something good, it's better to do something else. So I'm doing something else now. I don't want to mention what is it. But actually last week I began to read again. But I stopped 1 year. I really tried to find another way of writing. And you know, it's very complicated between reading and writing. And yes, of course I did read in this year. I was smuggling some stuff, some books. But I mean, like the habit was totally different. So I didn't have this 4 or 5 hours reading every day. I began to read in the time I have time. But now I went back. And that was because I felt that I need to take rest, to change my dictionary and to begin to be different. Because in every book I write, I try to be different than the book before.
Do you have more questions? Actually, yeah, what I was interesting for when we spoke before our meeting and while drinking coffee, we started like with at least I started with some kind of pessimistic notes about what's happening in the world, like so many people killed, so many people turned into refugees without their homeland, so many people drowned on the way to Europe, or even if they reached Europe, interned in the camps, the refugee camps, waiting for the papers and so on. But you said that you have hope, that you are optimistic. So, like, I wonder where do you take this optimism from? How do you manage not to lose hope and like view on the future?
Yeah, it's so related to Berlin. In this city, I'm fascinated by this city. It's have a wall, and this wall disappear. So 2 centers open to each other. This city, it's give me 3 things. I always think about them. The first is the hope that we can rebuild Damascus, for example. Because every time I saw Damascus and the destruction in Syria, I look to Berlin, my favorite city now, and it's really functioning well. 70 years ago was totally destroyed. So I say, okay, we can rebuild Damascus. The second, it is because it's history. I lost my land because the Reich, the Third Reich, the Nazi, it was in this city. And you know, this is what we call it the paradox. The things you hate, the things you love. And for me, love and hate, they came from the same thing. And the third, it is because the future I'm longing to is the cosmopolitan, multicultural, diverse societies. And here, where you can find the only example in the world, I think it's Berlin. So from these things, when I see a city like Berlin, I got to have a hope. But in the same time, it's dangerous. Because Berlin now, it's so similar to Berlin 1920s. When in the 20s, Berlin was the most cosmopolitan city in the world. And we all know what happened 13 years after that. So, and actually, I didn't see differences between the Nazi and the new Nazi. Like, both of them anti-Semitic, because we are Samic in a way. But like the Samic people, 1% of them are Jewish, 13 million. And 97 or 98% are Arabs, 500 million. So you can count them yourself. And this is the Samic people who came from Abraham. So yes, they took the Jewish away. They didn't want to be anti-Jewish because they can go to prison. But there it's okay to be anti-Arabs. It's a Samic people in a way. So I don't think they've even changed their way of behaving. I met a lot of the people who voted for Sverigedemokrat in Sweden. And like you say for them, but this is a racist party. No, it's not. It's only anti-Islam. I told them, but this is exactly what the Nazis were saying. We are not racist, or we are only anti-Jewish. Like, so it's like, yes, I have hope, but I have all the other things. Like, this is the normal life, to have the paradox of both. But okay, I'm not optimistic anymore. I really don't know. I don't know. I live in a country totally destroyed and the dictatorship win. Mm. So I don't know why I should be optimistic. Mm-hmm. I'm normal. Yeah. There's no normal.
The other thing that I was interesting for, it's if it could be described, competitive victimhood. Like for a long time I thought, okay, like for example, my grandparents were political prisoners in Siberia, so that the pain, let's say, of my family will help me to understand the pain, for example, of the local Jews who suffered under Holocaust in ghettos and so on. But sometimes we turn into totally opposite situation when, like, I speak and I scream about my pain, but please stay silent about your pain because I feel that somehow it will overshadow mine and so on. We can really feel this situation here. And for example, also when I went to Israel last year to interview Amos Oz, Israeli writer, he partly answered my question. I asked him the same, and he said, look, sometimes victims can be even harsher on the other victims. So in this situation, like, how to find conciliation or understanding?
First, I'm not victim, and I don't want to be a victim. Yeah, this is very important for me. But I noticed many things after, for example, what Europeans call the refugee crisis. I don't know why they call it crisis, actually. Maybe I will speak a little about that later, about the crisis. But I noticed something. Between 2008 and 2011, I was in big discussion with many of the Western intellectuals all over Europe about the Holocaust. And how the European, they always answer me that we didn't know. And I was naive enough to believe that they really didn't know in that time. But then when the Syrian revolution began and the mass killing began in front all of the world, and I began to say to the people, and then they continue denial, then I understand that they were liars and they know exactly what happened to the Jewish, exactly like what happening now. They know everything happening to the Syrian, but then even they refuse to open the borders. Not only not help. For example, Sweden in March 2013 voted in Brussels, in La Haye, against taking the file of Bashar al-Assad to the criminal court. and they canceled the decision. All Europe voted yes, Sweden voted no and canceled it. Security Council, he say, we send group to check the chemical attack, but they not allow to say who throw the chemicals. What the fuck? Strange. This Siri. So they not allowed to say who throw the chemicals, because if they say, then Assad will be criminal. United Nations decided to stop counting the death in Syria 8 months after the revolution. So Assad was free to kill how much he want. Mr. Barack Obama make block of selling weapons to the Syrian opposition, so we can't get rid of from Assad or stop him bombing us. So when I saw all this, I understand that these European people who told me we didn't know anything about the Jewish killing, they were fucking lying. They know everything. They know everything happened in Rwanda, Liberia, Kosovo, Syria. They actually was part of the killing by the silent. So I began to rethink about this. And I was fascinated by the article written by Hannah Arendt, We Refugees. And she described the Jewish who arrived to New York, and mostly how they want to be immigrant but not refugees. And they try to delete everything connected to the word refugees. They are only immigrant like this. And then I began to play, and I say, I take away the word Jewish and put Syrian, and it's function well, as if it's written now. And this is show how much she is genius. There is no differences. And about what they call the crisis, actually it's not crisis at all. The Syrian refugees were like normal, they got it before in Europe. More than 60% of the refugees and immigrants in the world are European, white European. They occupy the whole world. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Latin America, this is the refugees. They are the crisis. They are. Less than 1% of the European are immigrants from outside the white race. Less, it's 0.6 maybe. Crisis for what? Poland, they have 100 Syrian refugees from 7 years, and they make a lot of demonstration against them. Every week they make demonstration against this 100 Syrian. Once they asked me, and I told them on the stage, make for them football team. Make them a theater play, like all of them, it's 100. What the fuck you are doing? And you know what they say? They make a conference or, I don't know, parliament meeting, and they say, we can accept another 100 Syrian refugees if they are Christian. What the fucking value we have in Europe? Turkey have 6 million. So all these things make me really think about what kind of crisis. Yes, I'm so respectful for Germany and Sweden because they opened their borders. They take the responsibility to not be judged in the future. So now they can say, yes, we know and we did something. But the other will act after 40 years exactly like they act toward the Jewish. We didn't know what happened to the Syrian. And they repeat all these things.
As our conversation approaches the time limit, let's just, last opportunities to interrupt our conversation. Then I would like to ask you to comment on one of the sentences that I found in your poem called Details, and you write, the problem with war is not those who die, but those who remain alive after the war. How so?
Yeah. Yes, I really think that the main problem with war is not the people who died, but the people who remain alive after war. This is a little private, but I will say it. I have 2 brothers. One of them, he took the trip to Europe. It took 8 months, the sea and walking and like this, until he arrived to me in Sweden, Mihyar. And Ghassan got killed by Assad bombing, and we didn't find his body. And when I meet the people, they told me, oh, but it's okay, at least Mihyar, he survived. And then I began to think about the thing again. Is really he survived? Who is the survivor? Mihyar, who arrived to me, to Sweden, after he was 5 years under bombing and all his friends got killed in his hand. Or Ghassan is the survivor who died and got rid of this fucking life. And it seriously began to be inside me. Who is the survivor? What do you mean that he survived? He didn't survive. He escaped the war. He had post-trauma, panic attacks, like nightmares. He lost all his friends. He's in a place he didn't want to be in, darkness and cold and like this. He was like jumping like a rabbit and like free man in Damascus. What the fuck he survived? He didn't. It's really the question, like the war is really like, I don't know how to describe it for you. I didn't see it. But yes, and actually I began to write something, a discussion about even everything we call survivor. We should think about this world. What is survivor? Holocaust survivor. Who told you that he survived? He didn't survive. He didn't die in Auschwitz, but he didn't survive. So it's the world, it's really, yeah, good that I put it in the poem. The problem is the people who remain alive after the war. It's really problematic. And it is exactly like the Polish poet when he described it, that you will carry the city. You will carry the city with everything you saw in it. You understand? You saw the city in the last time before its fall down. So it's the hell. And you know, he said that the graves in crisis and the people is less, you know.
So, do I see any hands? If no, so I would like to thank you, Ghayath, for this conversation. I think it was very important, and maybe it can be also one of the last question. But when I thought why it is very important, it's also because we have to reflect on ourselves a lot. And when I made some kind of introductions or preparations for this discussion, I was given even the idea by one of the articles that 2 days ago I found on our in our media, and it was an article about the research that Lithuanian Social Research Center did, and the people were asked in a sociological survey, like, who are the groups that Lithuanians wouldn't like to work with, to live as neighbors together, or rent a flat together. And yeah, the results were quite obvious. We can say, you know, that like, yeah, now today we spoke about Poland, that we spoke about Hungary, and they have problems, but you know, they have problems, not we. But what we see among those 5 groups that many people wouldn't like to have anything in common, we see, of course, Roma people, we see LGBT people, we see Muslims, we see immigrants, and we see people who have mental health problems. So I think that's this article also gives a lot of, and this survey itself, a lot of things to reflect about the state of our society, about the attitudes that we held towards the others. And thank you a lot for this conversation and your insights and your poetry also.
Thank you so much. Thank you.